Blade Runner 2049 is a science fiction film released in late 2017 by French-Canadian director Denis Villeneuve, and these are my thoughts on it. The movie is a sequel to the 1982 cyberpunk classic Blade Runner directed by Ridley Scott and starring Harrison Ford, and I have to prefigure this review by saying that there is some trouble in reviewing Blade Runner 2049 because the original movie has a tendency in retrospect to be the subject of hagiography by people. And I'm here to admit fully that I am one of those hagiographers. I think it is a nearly perfect film. And I'm only saying nearly there as a sop to my modesty. I do think it's a perfect film. Blade Runner is an absolute masterpiece. It is one of the most important science fiction films ever made. The original film is a masterful synthesis of Sid Mead's visual futurism, the comic art stylings of Mobius found in Heavy Metal magazine, and the very heavy philosophical, religious, and consciousness-raising writing of Philip K. Dick. Both of the movies are set in a dark, near future. The world is a gritty, grimy, ugly, dirty place where governments have been allowed to lapse and businesses are now in charge of things. It's a world of vast technological achievements that have created an almost magical ability to do or have whatever we want. And yet we've also destroyed and ruined so much of the earth. Society is fragmented and divided as it never has been in the past, with a very wealthy ruling class and a miserably poor class at the bottom. Both of the stories turn around how society treats a group called replicants. These are androids that are so perfect and so exact in their design that they look indistinguishable from human beings. They look exactly like them in every possible way. And because they are not allowed to live with normal people and have a normal life and are considered less than human, there's a special class of people in the police called the Bladerunners that are sent out to hunt and kill them. If they ever try to embrace freedom and enjoy a normal life back on Earth instead of being forced into a kind of slavery, doing all of the dirty work that humanity has to do to colonize other planets. The original movie was an audio-visual feast. It was an artistic masterpiece by my estimation, and I absolutely love it. I've seen it many, many, many times, and there are people hearing that are going to feel that my opinion is biased when talking about the sequel, and, well, they're pretty much right. I am very biased, and that's where this review is going. When I was watching Blade Runner 2049, I felt very uncomfortably like I did when I was watching the movie The Two Jakes. Now, many people out there will have heard of the movie Chinatown, the 1974 Jack Nicholson, Roman Polanski-directed masterpiece of film noir set in 1930s Los Angeles. It's such an important film, and it's become commonly known to the public as a really masterful cultural achievement of that era. And yet, there was a sequel to this movie that was made 15 years later, in 1990, directed by Jack Nicholson, and this has almost the exact same feel to it. Both of these movies here, Blade Runner 2049 and The Two Jakes, are unnecessary sequels that bizarrely expand upon a film noir universe that didn't need any expansion. This didn't need to have any kind of an explanation. There are some people out there that may angrily say to judge the movie on its own merits, or just look at this film, you don't need to compare it to the predecessor, but that is, of course, nonsense. If this were just a random cyberpunk movie, if they just called it Cyberpunk 2049, I would be totally okay with judging it on those merits. But if they are going to be the ones that are going to try to capitalize on the previous film and tell a story in that universe, they're the ones inviting the comparison, and that comparison needs to be made. And guess what? If you're tying yourself to a classic, you damn well better have a good reason to do it. And this movie really does not. The movie takes place 30 years after the original, and it stars Ryan Gosling as a Blade Runner who's, just like Harrison Ford in the original movie, going after the replicants that try to run away. These robots that try to break their programming and embrace freedom are hunted down by the police and killed. While doing a routine investigation into a missing replicant, he happens to discover a pile of bones buried under the replicant's property. It's determined that the bones are of a woman, and she's actually a replicant who died during childbirth. And the story is set for discovering how a replicant could have given birth to a child, as a bunch of competing groups are all trying to find the child that this woman had 30 years before, while Ryan Gosling works around in the middle trying to avoid being swallowed up by all the various groups around him. Now, right away, I have a huge problem with this story, mainly because why can't these replicants have sperm and ova? I don't understand why they can't give birth. I mean, these creatures are precisely like human beings, down to sweat and blood and all of the bodily fluids. Why couldn't they replicate in their design the ability to have kids? I mean, it seems like they already would be able to do so unless they're sterilized from birth. As Ryan Gosling begins to investigate this, he realizes that a mega corporation that produces the replicants nowadays is out to find this child to presumably, I don't know, dissect it like the government guys in E.T. or something like that. And the police want it found so it could be destroyed to, I don't know, prevent something from happening. There's a lot of vague talk about how the world would somehow be upended completely if a replicant could give birth. Again, I don't quite know why, but whatever. It seems like people could accommodate themselves to that fact, and it wouldn't really matter. And they seem identical to fricking humans. I mean, what does it really matter? So Ryan spends most of the movie trying to track down this child, where it's gone, and prevent eventually the bad people from trying to find her. The movie goes wrong for me almost immediately. In the first 10 minutes, I was struck by something that was repeated over and over and over again throughout the film. Everything is incredibly on the nose. There is no subtlety whatsoever in any of the themes they're discussing. The original Blade Runner went through a variety of different, very deep and interesting philosophical, moral, religious, social, political, cultural issues that are all mixed together. And everything, very crucially, is done in a very intelligent, sophisticated, and sub rosa kind of way. They only openly talk about these kind of things from a distance. For instance, when we go to meet Tyrell, the creator of all of the replicants and really the starter of all of this robotic world, he is living in a literal ziggurat in the middle of the city, which recalls ancient Mesopotamian myths, which are of course where the Bible stories got their start thousands of years ago. He is also found in a very godlike or temple-like building with these large pillars all around, with a kind of heavenly light all around him. He is clearly positioned to be a sort of godlike figure, as he is the creator of life of these replicants. However, it's only very occasionally and very late in the day in the movie openly mentioned. All of this is in the background, whereas in Blade Runner 2049, one of the first things said by the replicants is,
"You new models are happy scraping the shit. Because you've never seen a miracle."
They're not talking like a real person would talk, replicant or human. No one would really speak like this, especially not in the first 5 minutes of the movie. It just sounded off, and everything else is so completely on the nose, it's ridiculous. There's a character here that replaces Tyrell, played by Jared Leto, and he is literally someone who refers to himself as a god. He calls the replicants angels. He talks about giving the angels wings. Here he actually creates the replicants out of clay, like God, and they pop out of a womb. Everything is so just blatant. It's ridiculous. There's no hint of any kind of subtlety. There's also a weird political element that's going on in this, and in the original, there was a heavy political element. Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction that was created in the early 1980s, partially because of Blade Runner. That was a major influence on the creation of this subgenre. And there's always been something of a political underpinning in cyberpunk, where the weird new future is one of sort of decay and urban destruction, where megacorporations rule the world and the decaying ruins of the democracies that gave birth to them. However, in the original Blade Runner, this was kept, again, mostly in the background, except for the very end, in the last 10 minutes of the movie, where one of the replicants tells Deckard, "Do you know what it feels like to be a slave?" Really then is when it's only one of the rare times it's actually mentioned. Everything else, you feel like a real person talking to real people in a real place. In this one, it doesn't feel like that at all. It's like they're just openly expressing all of their feelings and desires out and out, like a human being would never do. People always act with a bit of reserve and a bit of a mask in front of everyone, but here everything is just out on the table, like they're at a philosophy class and they're all talking about the religious implications of what replicants mean. It all comes off as very adolescent, Like some sort of high school student wrote this and not an adult writer who knows how people actually think and talk and act. Which is pretty strange because Hampton Fancher, one of the people that was originally involved in Blade Runner, wrote this screenplay. So it's pretty shocking that this is the dialogue that came out. As the story progresses, I found it curiously difficult to, well, care about any of the characters or their motivations. None of it really seemed to make sense or have any interest to me. I don't understand why the humans would want to get rid of all of these replicants and see them as such a threat. By the way, that's done in a very on-the-nose kind of way, too. Literally the first time we see one of these people, one of the police colleagues of our replicant detective walks by him and says, "F all you skin jobs." Now, there was a kind of almost racist hate against replicants in the original, but again, it was very sub rosa. They're not going to have people graffiti, "F all you skinheads, get out of here," on someone's door. It seems so ridiculous. It's just so childishly written, I couldn't stand it. I kind of sympathize, I guess, with Kay, the robotic detective who's looking into all of these things. By the way, our main character, the detective here, he's actually just straight up a robot, they tell you at front. Whereas in the original, again, because it was much more sophisticated, there is a lot of discussion about whether Deckard in Blade Runner is actually a replicant or not. They kind of hint at it here and there, but it's all kept completely under the table, like a more intelligently written and directed movie is. Here, he's just a replicant, and he has to deal with the fact that he's a replicant killing other replicants. And I tried to sympathize with him, but I don't think the acting here is really worth it. There's one scene where he actually just randomly screams in rage for no apparent reason, especially after he's been kept completely quiet and silent throughout the rest of the movie.
I know it's real.
I guess they were trying to contrast the outburst with how he was like before, but it just didn't really feel right. I mean, he does a serviceable job in this role, but overall he just felt like kind of a bloodless character who didn't really have any stomach going on for him. He didn't really seem like he felt the things he was going through, unlike Harrison Ford, who did a much better job of that, and was frankly more charismatic an actor in general. The villain is probably the worst thing in this movie, or villains, I guess there are two of them. And the fact that they exist is the problem. In the original one, there really is no villain. It's a film noir, so everything exists in this weird gray area. The nasty police officer that sends Deckard out obviously doesn't care a jot for any of these replicants, and doesn't care if they live or die and just wants them destroyed. Deckard clearly feels horrible about what he's doing, but he's still an assassin who's going out and murdering people that he almost certainly knows are actual living human beings and deserving of the same rights as everybody else. The replicants themselves are obviously very sympathetic because they're hunted and they were enslaved. However, that's tempered by the fact that they committed multiple murders in order to get to where they are now. Roy Batty gruesomely murders multiple people, including ones that are essentially innocent. They also murdered a number of prison guards on the spaceship before they landed on Earth. So what they did was not completely morally pure at all. They're not good, they're not bad. Even Roy Batty, the psychotic murderer, says, "I'm a slave, I was enslaved by your society, I'm going to do these horrible things." Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? He seems to kind of relish the murders he gets into, so he doesn't seem entirely good or entirely bad. You can feel for him and why he does the things that he does. And Terrell, the scientist that created the replicants, he's not a bad guy either. He's just sort of a tinkerer, a scientific whiz who invented this amazing thing. He's not evil, he's not terrible, there's nothing horrible about him. He's just someone who sort of tampered in God's domain, kind of like Dr. Frankenstein did. But in Blade Runner 2049, of course, because we can't have subtlety or any kind of nuance to anything, there is an evil villain. The head of the corporation, played by Jared Leto, is just horribly evil. He's blind for some reason. I guess that's supposed to be some kind of stupid metaphor, but it didn't really come across. It just came off sort of try-hardish, kind of like an adolescent wrote this. And he wanders around sort of doing these weird villain monologues about what he wants to do and how he wants to accomplish it, and says that he wants to create a slave class so that humanity can go to the stars and...
We should own the stars. Every leap of civilization was built off the back of a disposable workforce. We lost our stomach for slaves, unless engineered.
and create the colonies on other planets, and they need these replicants to do it for them. And he actually just kills one, just randomly, one of them that was just born. He ends up creepily, like, touching it and looking at it when it's naked, and just jams a knife into it for some damn reason, and it doesn't make any sense. Everything about this movie is a bit of a disaster. Jared Leto really wants the replicant baby that Rachel had, so he's sending out his robotic assistant here, and he wants her to go find it, get the bones, get the baby, and help Kay, the detective, discover where this baby is. I don't necessarily feel like she needs him to do this. I mean, she seems pretty efficient herself. Couldn't she go out and find it? She seems to have as much or more information as he does throughout the movie. I don't really feel like our main character is really all that important. This character is also positioned once again to be a villain, and I have a hard time getting to how I feel about this. Because this is a replicant. It's a robot. She is not a real person, and does she have programming? Was she made into this way? Did she break her programming and choose to be bad? She acts in a sort of stereotypically villainous way, doing cruel, unnecessarily cruel things. She's genuinely kind of horrible. And the actress really does a pretty bad job of this. She's a tiny little woman, but she has this ultra-powerful robotic strength. But she just doesn't look all that capable, and I don't really know why she's better at fighting than a police officer who's also a replicant. Shouldn't he be able to defeat someone who's essentially a secretary pretty easily, or is she some sort of special combat model designed by Jared Leto? I don't know. The actress really just doesn't do a very good job, especially once again if you compare it to Roy Batty, with Rutger Hauer, this amazing actor doing all these incredible things to create one of the most memorable people in all science fiction. And again, we don't need villains. In a film noir, you don't necessarily need a bad person. It's the system and the world that you live in that's bad. There may be people doing horrible things, but it's really the fault of the society that can't catch them that's really the bad guy in all of these situations, not the horrible person themselves. It's once again unsophisticated, uninteresting, high school level crap that really doesn't come across well. And speaking of things that don't come across well, let's talk about the visual presentation of this. The original film, however you feel about it, and the movie does have its detractors, of course, it's sort of known to many people how visually stunning and masterful the original Blade Runner is. Even if you hate it and criticize the story and the characters, this is one of the most beautiful films ever made. They used the futurist designs of Sid Mead, an artist who was sort of creating what it might look like in the future in these amazing drawings back in the day, and mixed it with the Mobius-style artwork that you might find in Heavy Metal magazine. And it is one of the most stunning, interesting, and important works that has been copied over and over and over again by a countless number of movies, television shows, and video games. It is one of the most important visual experiences ever on film, and it's been shown again and again and again. It's one of the most influential things ever put to film. Everything about it is absolutely gorgeous. I love the way the light works, the fact that it's set almost entirely at night, the weird fires burning in the background, the matte paintings, the design of the buildings, the design of the cars, the lights, everything around it is absolutely heavenly. Some scenes actually look pretty good, like when they go to an irradiated version of Las Vegas, which strangely has a yellow-orange tint to everything. All the skies are yellow and orange, and Las Vegas after the irradiation. I wonder where they got that idea from. It's sort of, it's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, wherever they got that from. The movie also shines visually in a few other areas, like when they try to show Jared Leto's corporate headquarters that looks weirdly like it's made out of stone. It looks sort of like an Egyptian tomb in a way, which I don't think quite translates well from the original ziggurat. I mean, it didn't look like it was the Great Pyramids of Giza on the inside. That doesn't quite work. And there's all this watery light coming up over everything, like in a Val Lewton movie, Cat People. And it looks alright. In a few other areas, it definitely looks beautiful. Unfortunately, it is in no way ever possible to compare to the original, and some of the other stuff looks downright terrible. The cityscapes are pathetic in comparison to the ones dreamed up in the original. They don't even remotely get it right here. It looks so banal and so bland. And the music, oh god, the music of the original Blade Runner is one of the best scores in any movie ever. It's done by Vangelis, a magnificent composer who blends in these synthesizer washes of sound with bits of piano and a mixture of Middle Eastern or North African singing with some East Asian sounds. It is a masterful soundscape that it is well worth listening to, even outside of the movie. But this one is just a microcosm for the entire movie. It is a pathetic retread, never captures the original, and seems pointless because we have the original. It just sounds horrible compared to it. It just sounds like a generic Hollywood score like 100 other movies made that year. It's boring, it has nothing on the original, and I just couldn't stand it. Speaking of which, that's a pretty good summation of my views overall of the film. Later on, as Ryan Gosling is running around trying to solve this mystery, they actually connect the movie finally to the original, with Rachel, the woman that Deckard ran off with in the original, being the woman who created life somehow, despite the fact that she was a replicant. And Ryan Gosling goes to meet someone he thinks might be his father, Harrison Ford, who plays Deckard, which might have made some sort of sense if it was a surprise, but if you knew anything about the original movie, you kind of knew he was going to have to show up, even if you didn't see him in the trailers. So there's no surprise there. When he goes to see Harrison Ford and ask him about the child, and Deckard is eventually kidnapped by Jared Leto and the terribly unscary robot woman here who really is just, she's just not frightening in any way, shape, or form. I mean, she's just not doing a good job here. So Ryan Gosling manages to escape from the evil corporate people that come to kidnap him, and he's actually rescued by a group of revolutionary replicants. The movie takes a weird political turn here, and don't get me wrong, the original movies, cyberpunk was always political, but the political aspect was really, as I mentioned about everything, buried as subtext to what was going on. But this movie actually has the gall to end with a sort of ridiculous revolutionary message that's thrown in at the end. See, Ryan Gosling finds out that a bunch of the replicants are actually planning to, do something to overthrow the government, or it's all very vague and ridiculous, and they don't go into it. It's almost like a prepackaged, corporatized idea about revolution that doesn't make sense in the real world. The original movie had a very Chinatown kind of feel. You can't fight City Hall, it's not going to work no matter what you do. This one has a kind of progressivist platitude about it, where it says, we just have to go and take to the streets and everything's going to be okay. That's really anti-film noir, a genre that's about how you can't fight the system. And the original one, I have to add, is one of the most personal movies ever made. It is an intensely personal film about the inner sadness that someone would go through when they're forced to confront the fact that their individuality and what they want and their desires is made irrelevant by the harsh demands of the world around them. Deckard wants to fight back against it. Rachel wants to run away. But they realize that they're always going to be chased. They're always going to be on the run. There's nothing they can really do. Any little act of rebellion is going to be smashed. So Ryan Gosling wanders around with these guys for a little bit, and we have this tedious little speech come from this revolutionary leader. And, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Obviously the replicants, who are probably outnumbered thousands to one easily by the teeming billions of human beings in the galaxy, they're obviously can't achieve anything, right? I mean, what would they plan on doing? I could see them maybe setting up some little colony somewhere with all the replicants to go, but they can't really fight back against humanity. Anyway, Deckard talks to these revolutionaries for a while, and he decides that he has to go and rescue Deckard from the corporate guys because he's going to blab about the revolutionary movement, which apparently they told him about for some reason or another. If he was like wandering away off in Las Vegas, why did they tell him about this? Was he participating in it? That really, again, adds to a negative impact to the original movie, which has happened multiple times now. They're trying to take the original story, and instead of making it about one person who was running away with the love of his life, they're turning him into some sort of nascent rebel, leading some sort of cause. None of that has any place in Blade Runner. None of that has any place in film noir. I mean, maybe to some degree it does in cyberpunk, but it really does not jibe with the original overwhelming kind of depression of the original film. So anyway, Gosling decides that he wants to be part of this revolution too, which is pretty sad that he gets swept up in the cares and desires of other peoples that he's only just met. But anyway, he goes to rescue Deckard. There's a ridiculous fight sequence between Gosling and the super tiny but also somehow super buff and strong corporate woman. Didn't Gosling defeat some super strong, brutal replicant that could, break through the wall with his bare hands just earlier? She looks like she knows, karate or something, but is that really enough? Also, why does she, vaingloriously declare that she has to win at the end and that she's superior? And the fight scene is terrible. I'm glad I never saw Sicario, another one of this guy's movies, because I just feel he can't film action or violence very well. He has this extremely bland, anemic emptiness about it, where all of the action is very... It's sort of soft and quiet, and there's no impact to it. It's almost like muffled or muted. There's something wrong about it. But anyway, after this horrible fight scene, Gosling eventually ends up rescuing Deckard and takes him to the woman they met earlier, who was apparently Deckard's daughter. And that's it. No resolution, absolutely nothing. What the hell? This revolution thing they brought up in the third act, where is that going? Is that going to happen? Is there anything that's going to be achieved by that? None of that makes any sense. And the evil corporate guy, Jared Leto, is still alive. Isn't he going to figure out what happened? Aren't they going to go after these people and figure out what... Isn't he tracking them? I mean... He presumably is still going to go try to kill them and take the woman and maybe kill Deckard, or... Nothing is resolved at the end. It's horrible. And I didn't even get into the excessive and incredibly long series of events with Gosling apparently in love with his computer. Yeah, he's in love with an AI version of a woman, who apparently we're led to believe can also reciprocate the love. Why would they make an AI capable of feeling love? It doesn't make any sense. Also, they're just ripping off another movie. Their movie Her. Or is it She? I think it was Her. But they're ripping off this other movie. They're not just ripping up Blade Runner. They're just ripping off all kinds of movies. And there was no need to do that. And it goes on for so long. And it's so uncomfortable. And it's so boring. Ryan Gosling, who I've been calling by the actor's name this time, is playing a character named Kay, by the way. I forget if I mentioned that or not. And that really reminded me of Fallout 4. And as much as I enjoyed Fallout 4, you don't want to plagiarize Fallout 4's story. The bottom line is, the movie is visually unimpressive compared to the original. The sound isn't very good. The characters are difficult to engage with or care about. The story frequently doesn't really make sense. And it goes absolutely nowhere. There's no resolution whatsoever. The dialogue isn't very good, and I felt myself throughout this movie nearly falling asleep. Now, one of my favorite directors is Andrei Tarkovsky, whose pace has been described in his films as glacial, and they're right. He is a slow, deliberate director that takes a long, long time to tell a story. However, his movies are masterpieces that I could watch over and over and over again. This movie is outrageously long, incredibly badly paced, way too slow, and I feel like I'm making a criticism that other people have made of the original Blade Runner. It's way too slow and boring. I can't get into it at all. It makes me fall asleep. The whole thing was just kind of a disaster from top to bottom. There's no need for them to have made this film. They should have just made some other random cyberpunk thing and without linking it to the original. I didn't like it. I didn't like the color palette, which I thought was kind of uninspired. The visual futurism was terrible compared to Sid Mead's work. Bottom line is, don't see this movie, especially if you're a fan of the original. Now, please tell me in the comments below what you thought of the movie, if you like this better than the original Blade Runner, if you think I'm full of it about what I'm saying, what your experience watching the movie was, if you were gripped from beginning to end instead of bored and almost falling asleep like I was. Just like this video if you liked it, and I'm going to be doing more videos about movies, television, and video games, so please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of that, and thank you very much and have a good day.